What is going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Masculine Health Solutions podcast, where I am joined by Michael Ostrolenk, who's going to give us a lowdown on how to basically make your mindset a little bit better. Why? Because he's got the background for it, man. I'm looking at the extensive background this man has when it comes to self-discovery, mastering these things, meditation, things that I've kind of gotten into myself, but am by no means, the master at this, which is why I'm always blessed to have some of the greatest people around, some of the greatest minds who come in and let us know about some of their extraordinary capabilities. And I'm blessed to have you here, Michael. But first and foremost, how are you doing today?
First of all, hey, I really appreciate you having me on. I'm doing fantastic. I amazing session this morning with my doctor. We're doing some human optimization work, and I walked out of that session feeling like really, really, really good. Actually, reminds me I need to let him know. I'm like, man, I'm feeling really good, doc. So it's been a good day. Good day.
No, and that's awesome to hear. And what I love about that too is that as we kind of step into a new paradigm, I feel like a lot of people are more into like the preventative side of things. A lot of people are just kind of like, hey, I'm kind of done with that old, paradigm or that mindset of like, I'm just going to get sick and take a pill. And a lot of guys are starting to discover that. But I kind of want to know where your story really began. When did you discover? Because you mentioned here, 9 years old, you started to get into meditation. How did that happen? And how did that kind of just start the journey for you?
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you a little story before I learned meditation, and it kind of tells you kind of my mindset, which is kind of really obnoxious as a 9-year-old, but it's good to go. That's who I. So I had some learning challenges in school. I loved to learn. Wasn't a big fan of schooling at the time, so school was really hard for me. And I had some health challenges. As a result of that, I was a hair puller. It's an obsessive compulsive disorder. And that's what I did to help myself relieve the stress that I was going through in these various places. And my mom took me to see a psychiatrist, and this is the funny story. So I do my 60-minute session or 55-minute session with a psychiatrist. And literally at the end of it, I turn to her and I say, he's fat, because he was. He smokes, literally in front of me, because that was in the 1979, you could smoke. He can't help himself. How's he going to help me? And I walked out of the. That's the kid that my mom and dad had to deal with. But fortunately, she agreed. And she's like, okay, and we'll find you a therapist, not a psychiatrist. Because in 1979, a psychiatrist would have put me on meds. That's what they do. That's probably what they do now. That would have led me on a whole different path than I ended up being on. My therapist, Mrs. Pat Lawson, first couple things she taught me was biofeedback. You got to keep in mind, this is 1979, so we're raising balloons on the computer screen, but this is 1979. It wasn't as cool as the technology is today. But for a 9-year-old, it was like, man, if I relax, the balloon rises. When I stress, the balloon falls. So like I get to learn how to manage my internal states. Is really cool. She taught me guided imagery, like, how I can play in the mind gym of my own mind and change my internal states. Just meditation, conventional meditation, or in the kind of more of the Buddhist type of meditation, the open focus meditation she taught me. She got me into the martial arts, so that began 41 years of studying a multitude of different martial arts, which is awesome. So like that was the beginning of my awakening, as best as you call it for a 9-year-old,
Yeah.
to what is possible in terms of like human growth and development and human optimization and health. And, and that turned into an intellectual interest. So my first 3 books I bought myself as a little kid were Zen Mind, No Mind by Daisaku Suzuki, book on Zen, obviously, a book on Zen and the martial arts, literally called Zen and the martial arts, and then a book on yoga. So like there's a psycho-spiritual, psychophysical interest in human optimization and wellness and development and spirituality from that early age.
Wow. I mean, to have your mind open at that age, dude, I was just thinking about comic books, but it almost seemed like you were like just living it. You're like, I'm going to go and develop my mind.
I was like Mr. X, like,
Yeah.
I own a little bit, yeah. No, Professor X, not Mr. X.
Yeah. Man, close enough, man.
Yeah.
But it's super interesting that kind of set you up on that trajectory for the rest of your life, because I kind of feel like there's always one thing that spurs us in a direction. And usually for people, that's a painful event. And I mean,
Yeah.
in your case, I guess maybe it wasn't necessarily a painful event, but it was a life-changing event. For you to have that astute observation as a child kind of says a lot about your personality, man. Because I mean, we started calling that out, I think, in like my mid 20s, I think, where a lot of us were like, hey, man, these doctors aren't healthy. Or even now, when we're calling out these healthcare ministers, people in charge of the health of countries, and we're like, yo, this guy's obese.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah, and not we don't have to necessarily get into it, but there's almost examples every couple of years of my life, from elementary school to middle school to high school to college to grad school, where I kept doing that kind of stuff, like challenging, like this makes no sense. Like you're the expert, but you're having me do this, and that doesn't fit into like all the questions that I'm sure I annoyed the shit out of people, or pointing things out that they didn't want to be seen. Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, I think it's necessary because you were looking for that root cause when it came to these people, and you were looking more for, again, the healing side of things, which is something that I think a lot of the time in our modern medicine and our quote unquote healthcare or sick care system, they don't really want to address these things. As you got older, though, what was the next thing that kind of like started to pique your interest as you kind of, you got into meditation, you got that down, where did it kind of go from there?
Yeah, and actually, if you don't mind, I would love to speak to, because you brought up prevention, like, oh, the next thing is prevention,
Yeah.
as opposed to like, I'm sick, I'm going to take a pill. But I would say actually there's a third option beyond prevention. There's like optimization. So we're not just preventing diseases psychologically, psychiatrically, and physically, but like, what's an optimized human system look like, and what are the
Yeah.
necessary to lead you in that direction? I think that is part, hopefully, of the future of medicine, psychology, psychiatry, moving forward. But with that said, to answer your question, if you still want me to answer that same question, so I read comics. I literally still have comics from the late '70s and early '80s, nicely
Wow.
up. So I still had a normal childhood to a certain extent. Um, and I would say like the next big thing for me in terms of like an awakening of sorts in the path I was actually getting an MBA. I finished my college work, and I was getting an MBA because I had a path. I had two things that are interesting to me: the inner work, the spirituality, the psychology, the nutrition, all the physicality, all the stuff that was interesting to me. But I grew up in Washington D.C., or outside of Washington D.C., our nation's capital here in the United States, and I always had an interest in things military and government, law enforcement, intelligence. I was surrounded by people who work for the CIA and FBI and government contractors and former military. That's kind of the milieu that I operated in as a little kid, and I always loved hanging out with adults. So like my path was actually heading into the government. And it was recommended to me when I did an interview with someone in the government, you should go get your MBA first and then come into the government. Because this is like early 90s, and MBA was the thing. Either you're a lawyer or you get an MBA. I don't think there's much value these days, maybe, in the MBA. But, okay, cool. So I was in the middle of an MBA program, doing fine. Like I had a 3.6 average, whatever, it was fine. And unfortunately, a friend of mine since kindergarten was murdered he was in a bar fight, and they took it outside, and the guy got a gun and killed him.
Jeez.
And that was like shock. I don't know if you're familiar with Joseph Campbell, but like a Dark Night of the Soul, or actually as Jung, a Dark Night of the Soul. And then within a month later, a teacher of mine committed suicide, which has kind of contributed to like, holy shit, what am I doing? What am I up to? And then some deep reflection, and I was like, the only part of the MBA program I like is the human psychological dynamics. But there's not a lot in there. I'm not interested in accounting. I'm not interested in all the other things. I did find it, but I wasn't interested in it. It's like, what I'm really interested in, going back to like when I was 9, was like, what are we capable of? Limitless capabilities. That's awesome. How do we explore that? How do we make that more of a possibility? And like, I'm like, well, being a therapist or some version of that would allow me to start working with people to help them just as I was helped when I was 9, to learn to regulate themselves and see what they're capable of, and living to all the possibilities of who we are as human beings. And I'm like, that's what I really want to go do. And I ended up going, I was living on the East Coast of the U.S., and I ended up going to the West Coast of the U.S. and spending 7 years doing graduate work at John F. Kennedy University in transpersonal counseling psychology. and then postgraduate work at the California Institute for Integral Studies in the Somatic or body psychology. And that was like my
Interesting.
home because that's where I have been living this whole time, like interested in studying those things.
Wow. And when you got into the somatic side of things, which is, I mean, it's pretty popular now because I believe it was The Body Keeps the Score is one book that kind of
Yeah.
set everybody up to learn more about and be more open to these things. Because for the longest time, it was always viewed as woo woo. And that's kind of, as I started to get into it, as like, I remember being a teenager and hearing about these things and I'm like, yo, this is fucked, dude. Like, this is some crazy, hippie shit, right? But the older I got, you know, the more I started to learn about it and the more it made sense. And I think now in this day and age, it's pretty cool because my kids are exposed to these things. We talk to them about these things and they know it's real, they know it works. And the more you start to explore the body and just figure out how these things manifest themselves and how we hold on to these things and the mindset and everything and how like the mind body kind of works. When you got into that at that time though, what was the perception back then?
Yeah, I think you use the word woo woo.
Yeah.
I mean, you can think about this too, because we can talk about both my graduate studies, postgraduate and graduate studies. My graduate study was transpersonal psychology. No one knew what transpersonal psychology was. Still, a lot of people still don't. But
Mhm.
I can get into that. But that was even woo, if that was such a word, back then than it is now. And somatics was definitely woo woo. Like, yeah, you had a couple of people might be meditating, and a couple of people do yoga, but like meditation, yoga is all over the place, and all kinds of people get massages and rolfing done, and it's like no big deal now. But in 1992, 93, 94, it was definitely a San Francisco Bay Area phenomenon. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And then your other study, the transpersonal, can you give us the lowdown on what that is? Because I have no idea what that is, man.
Yeah, so one way to conceive of it is this: all religious systems, monotheistic out of the Middle East, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism out of the East, Native American or South and Central American shamanic traditions out of Africa, et cetera, et cetera. All the different Taoism, Hinduism, Buddhism, all the different religions. They all have spiritual practices that they encourage their members to do, whether it's meditation, breath work, yoga, psychedelics for some of the traditions, or sacred medicine, plant medicine. There's some pain techniques that are utilized, sensory deprivation. Why? Because practitioners realize when you do these practices, it changes consciousness.
Mhm.
Depending on what the practice is, it can expand the mind, it can open the heart, it can free the body. So what we learned in transpersonal psychology, we had to learn all the other schools like object relations and self psychology and cognitive behavioral stuff. We also learned like you can actually change consciousness through these practices, bodily consciousness, conscious in the mind, spiritual consciousness, however you want to look at it, and you can look at it all the different ways. And those practices were woo woo back then, but today, like there's, for instance, psychedelics are much more mainstream. They're being used and studied for combat veterans with PTS. One example here in the United States, it's been shown to be effective for like drug and alcohol abuse. Some of the psychedelic medicines, for instance,
Yeah.
meditation has been well studied on the positive benefits for immune function and cognition and all the stuff. Not
Hmm.
forget the insights. The spiritual insights are really fascinating, but just in terms of human health and well-being and wellness, they've shown to be effective. Like breathwork practices are huge, like Wim Hof as one example. I studied under Dr. Stan Grof. He was an LSD researcher in the 50s and 60s, and he created holotropic breathwork, which is a fast-paced breathing methodology which induces non-ordinary states. But you can also do other kind of breathing practices which relax the body. You can, if your energy is low, you can raise it up. If it's too high, you can bring it down. You want to expand in consciousness, you can do breathing practices. So science is finally catching up with thousands of years of human beings playing around with these tools and practices, and the mainstream or culture is also integrating a lot of them into the discussions. So they're not as woo woo as they once were.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's pretty. It's pretty stupid of us as a modern society to just dismiss everything and say, no, that's some hippie, bullshit that doesn't work. I think it was pretty stupid when I started to learn more about it and got kind of get more in depth. It's like, why did we write all that off, man? Like, we've been doing it for thousands of years. And
Uh,
it's, oh, go
and
ahead.
it's a great question, but there's actually political reasons for why it was written off. And we don't
Interesting.
necessarily go there, but the drug war in the late '60s, early
Yeah.
'70s, which is Richard Nixon and his people here in the United States admitted to going criminalizing a lot of these drugs. Why? Because hippies were using them, the anti-war left was using them, and we wanted to not we wanted to break up the movements against war, against the present day institutions that we had going. So there's political reasons why
Yeah.
the mainstream media and the government did its best to crush some of these tools. It makes
Yeah.
sense.
I mean, I understand it, but at the same time, it's like, when it comes to like breath work and meditation and stuff, and I get an altered state of consciousness, but then again, it's kind of like the real enemy has always been like cocaine. It's like cocaine, meth. I mean, it's not the psychedelics. When it comes to
I agree.
mushrooms and psilocybin, I'm like, you know
I
what? I
agree.
think it's fine.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I wouldn't. I'm not a proponent that everyone should use psychedelics.
Yeah.
Set and setting. There's a lot of questions to be asked any particular person. But like that versus cocaine or heroin, yeah,
Yeah.
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 But
There's a strong boundary.
yeah, yeah.
It's kind of like you're not gonna do fentanyl and be like, I came out enlightened. It's like, nah, I doubt it, man. I
I'm like,
doubt it.
yeah.
Might lose a couple brain cells, but that's pretty much it. But following your journey then and getting into these different things, how would you say that somebody could start applying some of the practices from what you've learned? So, getting back to the transpersonal side of things, what was kind of the first technique that you found that somebody could take in and start applying? Like, what did it look like when people came to you with things like alcoholism or addictions? How would you actually use these tools to make it so this person could let go of that habit and start to develop new ones? Or
All right. You just opened a huge can of worms by bringing in addiction. So let me kind of put that on the side because that's a whole different approach how I might use transpersonal methodologies. But what I'm going to say could be used there. But let me just talk about everyday neurotic people as opposed to addictions to drugs and alcohol. So if one looks at our culture, the way I like to think about it, it's full of noise. Like you're in an elevator and there's music, or even not, there's videos. You're at the gas station, there's videos you can watch while you're pumping your gas. You're at a bar or a restaurant, there's always noise in the background. Like
mm,
we can argue whether it's intentional or not, but our systems are full of noise. And then our homes with our devices, like full of noise. And I would say that one of the first things that can be really beneficial is find space that's noise free.
oh,
And that could be a walk in nature. You don't necessarily have to do like a 7-day meditation retreat. Like literally no devices. I mean, you can have it for safety reasons. Let me encourage that. But like you're not on your device. Literally go for a walk in nature, or sit quietly on your porch and watch nature happen in front of you. But more importantly, I would say watch nature happen inside of you. Because what I find with a lot of my clients is they're so unused to sitting with their own systems, thoughts, the feelings, the sensations, energetics of the body, that's really uncomfortable for them. And as we learn to be more comfortable with whatever's arising inside of us, once we become comfortable with it more over time, we can manage it and we can learn to express it in healthier ways. Because if we don't, it comes out sideways, passive aggressive behavior, or it comes out as chronic illness. There's various ways that we don't deal with what's happening inside of ourselves that it will come out, just not in ways we want it to come out. And the more we're capable of being aware of, allowing what's happening inside ourselves, managing it to its higher ends, the more we're able to do it with another person, which deepens our ability to be intimate with another human being, whether it's our spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend, friend, kids, whomever it is. Like the more comfortable we can be with ourselves, the more comfortable we can be with someone else too. So I'd say the first thing is like just find some time for quietude and learn to be with your own experience.
interesting. I guess that is a major factor of what's missing in today's society. I can attest to it. I mean, I'm busy, always on the go, go, go.
Yeah.
However, when I do need time to relax, I'll look for like an empty room and just sit there, man. Like, and that's going back to what you've been talking about is almost like just being still. And it kind of goes back to a Bible verse I remember too, where it's like, be still and know that I am God. And it's almost like I kind of go back to that because I'm like, there's a lot of wisdom in that. You know, it's a very short sentence,
Yeah.
but at the same time, you kind of take a step back and you just be still, man. And you just relax, and all of a sudden, it's like it just brings everything like that internal noise almost from like a 10 down to like a 4. Again, just kind of like deflates you almost.
I love that Bible verse. That's kind of perfect. And what's really amazing is, as a somatic practitioner, there's wisdom in the body. And there's wisdom other places too. In the transpersonal space, you can download it or upload it. We can talk about that too. But like, we are not taught to learn to be in our own bodies. We learn to use them for ends. Like, I can play football, I can play basketball. I can stay up all night long studying. Like, I can force my body to do things, which is great. I mean, it's important to have the capability of pushing yourself through certain things. I can attest to that. I do that probably too much. But the wisdom in the body, like if we could learn to be still enough to access it. And I've studied Chinese medicine. I studied Ayurvedic medicine, from the Indian tradition too. You don't just have to use those models, but I really like those models. Like, there's a lot there. Like, that if we pay attention to, we would less likely have chronic stress, chronic illness, the passive aggressive behavior of other human beings, which is great. Like, that's the preventive side. Let's have less of that. But like, let's optimize. What would it be like to actually engage the wisdom of the body and allow as information for us to move us in our lives? I would imagine, among other information sources we would want to use, we would take better decisions. We listen to our gut. We listen to our mind. We listen to our heart, as opposed to like the programming we have from our family of origin, which is fine. We all have it. Our religion, our nationality, or ethnicity, all those forces lead us to be programmed in certain ways, and that's just human beings. But like, you can start freeing yourself from those programs. You can choose, like, oh my God, I love the message I got from my parents. I love the religious message. Cool, that's awesome. Your choice. It's not programmed in the back of your mind, but you also have access to other types of information too to make better decisions.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point, it's almost like I view it more from like a healing modality, but you see it more as a way to not only heal, but, optimization. The one thing you kind of mentioned was like the downloads. Were you kind of like alluding to like the Akashic records or just intuition?
Well, so like, I share a little bit of my own experience. When I was a kid and I was meditating all the time, I'd have OBEs, out of body experiences, all the time. I was floating
Yeah.
around my, so like, I've been open to more of that kind of transpersonal realm. Everyone has their own interpretation of what that means, their own spiritual understanding of religious systems, and my thing is not to argue you're wrong, I'm right, you're wrong. But it seems that human beings do have access to information that's not limited by our five senses.
Mm.
And if we're quiet enough, I call it transrational intuition. Like, we can access information that's outside of our physical bodies, our skin encapsulated egos, like Alan Watts would call it. But it requires us to be still.
Interesting. Yeah, because I mean, I first heard about that where people would talk about getting downloads, right? And the first place I'd actually heard about it was musicians, right? Where they're just like, dude, I was just walking down the street. And I don't know if you ever heard the story of Prince and Michael Jackson, right? Where
No, no.
apparently Michael Jackson woke up at like 3 a.m. and he's like, he tells his producer, I believe, he's like, hey, get up. We got to go to the studio. And the guy's like, it's 3 a.m, Michael. I don't want to go to the studio right now. He's like, no, we got to go now. If not, Prince is going to take the song. I just downloaded it. And it's
Oh, wow.
almost like, yeah. And the reason why for me, it kind of shocked me because this kind of gets back to the whole downloads and intuitions in
Yeah.
that he knew it was almost out in the ether, but he came, had the download, and then he's like, okay, no, I got to put it out first because I know Prince is very receptive too. So I got to make sure this fool doesn't get it.
Yeah. So, and there's different models and maps to try to understand that phenomenon. I like Jung as one way. You can talk about the collective unconscious, and all
Yeah.
human beings have access to that field or frequency, however you want to articulate it. So I love that story. That's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And clients, like, you can gain access to that information during waking consciousness. And there's various tools you can use, like sensory deprivation tanks and psychedelics and all that stuff. But sometimes it can just happen spontaneously in certain circumstances. But you can also use dream time too. Like I love it. It's 3 o'clock in the morning you woke up, because dreams, at least from my perception of them, gives you really interesting information about yourself and collectively too.
Yeah,
And
and again, going back to like the Bible, it's like they had dream interpreters back then, right? And it's kind of funny because like the modern church is like, no, it's satanic sometimes, and they're like, but yet in the Bible, it's like, you know, King Solomon, King David, they had interpreters
yeah,
to their dreams. It's like, come on, man, it's something
yeah,
about just being a human and having these symbols which have existed for years and years on end, right? And that kind of, again, going back to my old point, it's just I feel like it's a resurgence of the old that we're starting to see in the new, right? In this modern society, it's almost like, okay, let's merge some of this technology with the spiritual side of things, because in my opinion, I think, you know what, we're not just flesh and blood, man. Like there's a spirit, you got a soul. Unless you're a clone, then I don't know, man, then you know you shouldn't listen to this podcast. But
I'm a robot. I think I'm a robot.
yeah, you know, I do feel that that exists inside of all of us. I wanted to get your take on, because you had mentioned psychedelics and stuff, and I had tried psilocybin, and I found that it was, honestly, it was a incredible experience. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be like, oh, I'm just going to blast off, but it was more of a, it was a more of coming in contact with the inner child and making peace, and it was actually pretty beautiful, and it was great peace that washed over me, and then I cried like a little girl, you know. So you know, but it was like that letting go kind of process. But what's your take on psychedelics like psilocybin? I think iboga is one of them as well that's starting to come up, and DMT, ecstasy, all these different things that people are starting to explore now and are open to. What's your take on it?
Well, I just say I'm not recommending anyone do anything illegal. Don't violate your state, federal laws, or whatever your government. Be really careful you decide to experiment with these things, because you got to make sure you have a good source for the thing. You know, it's not mixed with other things that are problematic. It's important to have a good guide, in my opinion, and a proper set and setting. So put all that aside. So I did my master's thesis in 1997, I think it was, on the therapeutic uses of LSD and MDMA.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been following the field prior to that, because that's why I generated my thesis, and I've been following it ever since. And the research is pretty clear, and this is not for everyone at all times, but the research is pretty clear that certain medicines for certain conditions have shown to be very beneficial. And it's not just since that time period, like MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, Rick Doblin, they've been promoting a lot of great research and supporting it. But there's research going back to the 50s and 60s that showed the benefits of these medicines. So I'd say, you know, LSD, psilocybin, ibogaine, ayahuasca, MDMA, all the different ones, they have different effects. So it's not like I want to put them all together and say, this is for that. They affect ones differently. Like ibogaine, from what I understand, is great. It's being studied for addiction, especially it's been shown to be really effective with American combat veterans. There might be Canadians involved in it as well. I'm just familiar with the American population who are using it to help them deal with their drug and alcohol abuse as a result of PTSD, you know, from all their time in combat. So, wow, that's really cool. MDMA, you know, it was a couples medicine. It was actually used for couples therapy before the DEA criminalized it in, I think, 95, 96. I might have the year off wrong. Well, because that one is an empathogen. It literally opens the heart. It reduces your defenses, and you feel more fully what's real for you without all the defenses in the way. And you feel so loving and caring and compassionate, and you're with your partner, both of you feel that way, that you can share more honestly and openly.
What?
So like originally used for couples, and now it's been studied for the last 20 years, I think, for combat veterans and others who suffer from PTS. So like, wow, that's a really interesting medicine too.
Yeah, I'd never heard that take on it.
What's that?
I'd never heard that take on it. I thought it was just for like ravers.
Yeah. No, man, it's like check if you're interested. Check out the MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. If you ever want to look at the research, they've done a lot of great research. I think they're called Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3. I'm hoping this new administration in the United States will change. There was an opportunity under the Biden administration to have MDMA change from a Scheduled 4, which means it has no medical use, changes scheduling because the research shows it to be certainly effective with certain things. And there's an advisory board that ruled against it. And the Biden administration followed the advisory board. I think that was a really poor decision because the research shows to be effective. You know, maybe you need more research. That's cool, but it's definitely not a Schedule 4 drug here in the States. Like, it does have medical use. And I'm hoping the present administration, and if Bobby Kennedy makes it into HHS and the FDA can change its ways a little bit, that you'll see it move from Schedule 4 to something else, maybe Schedule 3, which is still controlled, but it has it's recognized to have medical uses. And I think I'm pretty libertarian, so like I don't like to schedule anything at all. But let's be realistic; all of them have medical uses. Like marijuana is the most interesting thing. Like, I don't know if you know this, but it's been criminalized here in the States at the federal level for the longest time.
Yeah.
But the federal government's been funding research out of Israel since the 1960s, looking at the efficacy of marijuana for various health conditions, and the research shows to be positive. So you're like, wait, so part of the government's saying there's no medical use and we should criminalize it and people should be in jail, and the other parts of the government saying, let's fund research and it shows to be effective for certain things. That's kind of a schizophrenic policy.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, though, when it came to weed, I remember hearing about how it was actually the oil industry that wanted to cancel it because they discovered that they could use hemp for a lot of things that they were building or using with plastic. So that's kind of why like hemp clothes instead. Now we got basically all kinds of carcinogens in our Lululemon and, all our clothes and stuff where they could have just used hemp. And now if you go out of your way to get a hemp shirt, it's like double the price. And it kind of goes back to like, well, we'll just use the microplastics. And when you sweat, well, you'll take them in and get sick.
Yeah, all decisions have consequences. And that's a really bad. Yeah, I've heard the same thing. Both that for industrial competition between inside industries, and then also like, hey, we can go after Black and Hispanic people because they're primary users of it. We can well. So like, there's other things I imagine to be true as well, but neither one of them are good ways of making policy. Like, I support a free market. Hey, let competition see what actually works, as opposed to using government fiat to support friends in the market against you, people you don't like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is what it is, but luckily, like I said, the consciousness is changing. So as more and more people kind of start to gravitate towards these things and kind of say, hey, you know what? There is something good here. And with, honestly, everything that goes on in the States affects Canada directly because it's like, hey, you know what? We're just kind of, it's like whatever policies they run, it's like, all right, we're running with that too. But when it comes to RFK Jr., I kind of feel like he is going to make some big changes, and hopefully we can start to see a lot of things change, man. Because we're up for it, right? And as you guys start to make some changes, Canada starts to move in the same direction. We're just copycats when it comes to like our government for the most part. It's like we're just gonna do what Big Brother tells us to do. But
well, hopefully Big Brother tells you to do better things than it has so far.
Yeah, a lot of craziness right now. But hey, you know what? When the markets start to settle, woke up yesterday, crypto was down 20%, and woke up again today, and then all of a sudden I'm back up to normal. So I don't know. There's a lot of fear in the market, a lot of craziness. But even then, I always find that out of the craziness and out of the chaos, there will be some type of order. Just hopefully not like an Illuminati type order, but something that's more not Albert Pike's wet dream. I'm not into that, but something that works better for humanity. And going back to that, human optimization, and when it comes to the different modalities that you kind of had mentioned, we kind of got into breath work and meditation and stuff. But what are some other things that guys can do for the most part? Because I do feel like right now in our modern society, a lot of guys just kind of feel lost. Luckily for you at 9 years old, it's almost like you had that North Star right from the get-go. But if a guy kind of wanted to align himself and say, hey, you know what, I want to start today, really start making these changes, start to move in the right direction, and start optimizing myself as a human being, how would you recommend that dude start taking basically charge of his life and using some of these tools that you've used for their success?
Yeah, no, I love that question. So when I work with individuals, I work with couples, I also co-lead a men's group called Resilience Optimized with a buddy of mine, JC Click. With my individual work, I have 4 pillars: physiological, psychological, social, and environmental. And I'll use that framework to answer your question. So you want to dial in your physiology. Sleep is the most important thing. Like, you really need to get sleep. Like, I'll sleep when I'm dead, or you'll be dead sooner than later. So like, get your sleep line. You'll feel so much better. And, and we could spend an hour or 2 or 3 going down the sleep path, but, check out, I will give you some resources, including the show notes, of people to check out who are sleep experts. I'll just do it that way, as
Yeah.
opposed to like, let me tell you about sleep and how it's important and who you should listen to. But there's some great on sleep. Dial on your sleep. So I'm really big into circadian biology. Like, we evolved on planet Earth with day and night light cycles. And for the last 120 years, due to a wide variety of things, from artificial light to now computers and all of the other things and the drugs we can use to wake us up and put us to sleep, we've knocked ourselves out of the circadian biological rhythm that we evolved inside of. That's really important. So, like, if you're not a night worker, cool. And everyone's uniquely individual, but it's important to get sunlight in the morning. Like, go outside. Like, Andrew Huberman talks about this all the time. Really important. He can shoot you. You want the science behind this, but I've been saying this for 20 years now, at least. Like, you need to be outside in the morning. It's really good to be outside at night as the sun sets. And, the science, check out Huberman. He has all the science. But, like, you want to organize your body as best as you can within the 24-hour day and night cycles. If you use exogenous chemicals to shift that, there's consequences. I'm not saying don't do it. Like, hey, if you need to step a little bit later, okay. Dynamic homeostasis, there's going to be costs to the other end. We need to learn how to deal with that. If you need to get up much earlier than you're used to for particular periods of time, okay, there's costs to that. We need to deal with the costs. But try to stick within the 24-hour day and night cycles, sun rises, sun sets. Try to get good sleep. Hydration. Hydration is like, hydrate.
Yeah.
Literally drink as much as you. No, I shouldn't say as much as you can. Everyone's unique. Everyone's different. But you don't want to just. You also, my consideration is like, it's not just plain drinking water. You got to make sure you have the minerals, so you're not demineralizing yourself with too much liquid throughout the day. But if you do consume fruits and vegetables, that also contains liquid, so you can get it inside of your diet. Your diet is really important too. Like, hey, if you're a vegan, vegetarian, paleo, carnivore, whatever your thing is, cool. Try it out. See if it works. And three of the ways you can figure out if it's working for you is first person, second person, third person. First person, how do you actually feel? And I don't mean just the first couple of days on a diet, because you might feel like shit, or you might feel great because you're like, oh, I'm not eating processed foods, I'm eating this. Great. You're going to feel good because you're not eating the processed foods. You might not be feeling great because of the things you actually are eating. Okay, awesome. Get blood work. Go get a functional medicine doctor or an epigenetics coach. Get blood work. Like, you get your baseline. Let's see where you're at. All your hormones and inflammatory markers. Baseline. Play around with your diet. See if diet and nutrition can positively influence those markers over time. So how you feel is important, but it's not. You don't want to limit it. You actually want objective markers to determine whether these things are working for you, including nutritional supplements. Cool. I've been playing around with that since I was a kid. Like, I started taking vitamins when I was like probably at 9. And I took smart drugs when I was in high school, like from the European Union, from the UK. So I've been biohacking for a long time. But does it work? Get blood work. Let's find out. Don't just piss your money out here, trying everything that sounds really cool. Let's find out what works for you. So diet, nutrition, hydration, sleep, and then I'd say another piece of that too is fitness and movement. It's important to do something every day. Now, you don't have to be like a gym stud. You don't have to go for 3 hours every day. You don't have to do CrossFit or SealFit, although I'm a big fan of SealFit because I work with Market SealFit.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that kind of stuff. Like, find someone who knows you well enough, who can know you well enough, like a physical trainer who's knowledgeable. If you have any health conditions, physical or whatever, that you got to work within the constraints. But like, I think the research shows that you want to be doing something, maybe not every day, but 4 or 5 days a week, with weights, if that's appropriate for you, based on whatever you've got going on physically for yourself. Walking is cool. They're kind of pushing against all the cardio most people did over the last 20, 30 years. And maybe, talk to your physical trainer about how cardio fits into your training regime. Mm-hmm. But it sounds like for long-term longevity and health, weight training seems to be one of the better decisions to take as part of your physical training. But, get a regime going for yourself. And all these things I do with my clients. And then movement. Movement is not training. Training is like, hey, I train for an hour every day. I do bar ride, I do kung fu, I do whatever. I run, I bike. Movement is like, hey, break your day up. Don't just sit at the computer all day for 8 to 12 hours. Like literally, I mean, depending on what your schedule is, every 90 minutes, if that works for you within what you got going on in your life, go for a walk. Like literally 5 minutes outside, depending on the weather, where you're at.
Yeah.
Walk around, get some vitamin D, get some sunlight, get some fresh air, move the body. If you can't go outside, a little Tai Chi, a little yoga, a little Qigong, something. Don't be sitting there all day long.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are consequences to posture, muscle tone, and organ function from sitting in the same position too long over days, weeks, months, and years.
Yeah.
Move. Those are some of the physiological things I say start considering and start implementing in your life. I'll stop because then I can go into the psychological, I can go into the social and environmental too.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with everything that you say. I mean, the one thing that I am kind of guilty on is when I wake up, sometimes I don't really do the go outside kind of thing. Even though I know all the science says that I should, I'm just like, it's kind of cold today, man. Like, I don't want to go, you know. But
Right.
other than that, I completely agree with what you said about like the steps. Steps is a big one for me that as I get older, I mean, I still love playing sports. I got a 14-year-old that I basically got to run around after and play basketball. So and
Nice.
he's like, hey, what, we were gonna play football today. I'm like, fuck, I'm tired. Okay, let's go. But I don't want him to be like, no, man, my dad can't move. He can't juke or anything anymore. No, I'm 100%, on board with the older you get, the more movement you should have in your life. Sprints. I mean, for me, it's kind of like I took out jogging because I just find that it was putting too much stress on my joints, and I just found that I'm better off just sprinting, just going for that like heavy, ATP kind of CP system type exercise to really, really stimulate my body. But I mean, that's kind of me personally, and that's why I 100% agree with everything that you said there. But let's jump into some of the psychological things that need to be looked at because, I mean, I'm starting to tread into unknown territory here. I mean, I got some basics down, but this is the stuff that kind of scares me and I think would be beneficial to a lot of people that are
Yeah.
listening to the show.
Yeah. Like, if we had 5 hours, I'd go through everything pretty quick. Find a couple things. So one thing is to start thinking about is how one thinks, speaks to themselves and speaks to other people. Start noticing your language, tone and volume, and what you actually say. I think a lot of people will be surprised how negative they are inside their own heads about themselves, about the situation, about other people, and how negative they are when they're talking to other people about other people, including the other people. It's like, just start noticing that. I'm not, and in my work with clients, I do have them spend a good amount of time doing that. Because what you say to yourself, you believe. What you start saying to other people, they're going to believe about themselves too over time. For the most part, unconsciously, they're not. There could be a defensive mechanism against it. They're going to push back, but like if they care about you and you keep saying negative shit about them, they're going to start believing that at some level. Mm-hmm. That's really important to know. Those are kids. As a parent to your kids, if you keep hitting them with negative stuff, they're going to start believing the negative stuff, and that becomes not your voice inside their head, but their own voice inside their head. So start paying attention. Start paying attention to that. Another thing too, I think is really important is what I would under spiritual, because I go cognitive, how we think. I go emotions, how we feel. I go somatics, how we embody ourselves. Energetics, the energetics of the body, and then spirituality. And part of spirituality for me is our values. It's important to do a values assessment. What do we value? What's important to us? And ask ourselves, is that really important to me intrinsically, or is it something that I've been taught to believe to be true, to be important to me? And once you clarify that, you're clearer on what this is important to me, then you have to ask yourself, am I living out those values? If you're not, then maybe they're not your values. And if you aren't, maybe they are your values, but you need to learn how to live out those values. You proclaim one thing and you do another. There's a lack of alignment, lack of integrity. And a lot of my work with clients is like, let's get some integrity there. So you start noticing, I think I believe this to be true, a value, and I'm doing something different. This is not to beat yourself up, but just notice, okay, there's a lack of alignment there. I need to spend some time there. And another thing I think is important is character traits. What are the character traits that you think are important to you? And for instance, like, courage and bravery and honesty and integrity and love, care, compassion, whatever your mixture of those kind of character traits you think are really important. I always have clients clearly define what they mean by that. And then very similar to the values, are they living into those? So my favorite example to use is like, I work with a couple, I do couples work too. I want to be more present with my wife. That sounds nice. That's awesome. What do you mean by being present with your wife? I don't know. And they think about it and they go, here are the 4 characteristics of me being present with my wife. Okay, cool. Ask your wife what it mean for her if her to believe that you're being present with her. Ask her, and she's like, "Oh, here's a couple other characteristics. Don't be on your phone. Face me. Eye contact. Active listening. Repeat back what you hear me say. You can paraphrase it. Whatever the things are." That's awesome. Now you know, and you can assess: are you actually living those principles, or those character traits, or the values, whatever it is? So you can do this in first person, like, hey, these are my values, these are the character traits. You can assess yourself. How am I doing being present with my wife? Okay. But just as important, probably even more important, since this is a relationship thing, ask your wife. Now, she might be having a bad day and think you're an ass that day, and so maybe that reflects not the best. But over time, you might hear from her like, hey, you're not doing that great with presence. When we are talking together, I notice you're looking away, you're on your phone. You're not actively listening. You're not reading back what I have to say. Cool. Course correction. If that's important to you, then course correct. Not to beat yourself up, but like, oh, I need to be doing better. So in the psychological space, I'd say those are kind of some highlights, but not. There's hours of other things there too to start paying attention to.
I could imagine. I mean, but it's kind of like that rough, I guess, framework that we all kind of need. And you're right. What I like about what you mentioned there too is that it's almost like the husband that wants to be more present. He needs that reference point. We all do. Yeah, for the most part, sometimes when we're forced to give our own personal self-evaluation, we're like, no, I'm doing fine. And then somebody else judging us and be like, yo, man, you suck. And it happens all the time. Like we're almost oblivious to our own mistakes.
Yeah, that's why I like my kind of larger friend groups: first person, second person, third person. First person is like, I feel, I think, I see. Like, oh, and you can be delusional. Like, oh my God, I'm so much more loving. I'm so much more caring. Like, but the second person, like someone in your life who can reflect back to you, like, no.
Yeah.
Or yeah, like you're doing a great job. Keep it up.
Yeah.
And the third person is like objectively, those are objective things that can be measured. And in some cases there are, like we talked about blood work, like you can look at your markers.
Yeah.
Like how are you doing? You can look at brain function. So there, I think that's a useful tool to analyze yourself.
100%. Yeah. And it's kind of, because the thing is too, it's hard to evaluate yourself from things that you don't have like a hard number per se. It's not like you're getting the PSI in your tires or something where it's like, okay, cool, I'm not where I need to be. I need to pump it more, like, or I'm a little bit lower than I should be. And my car is telling me this is something that's more, a little bit more difficult.
100%. And the example I can use objectively, third person, for relationship stuff is I have most of my couples use heart math.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I've heard of it.
Okay, it's a great tool because you get objective measurements how heart-based you are. It's a biofeedback type device.
Yes.
Are you in coherence? Is your mind, your brain in the head, and coherence with the heart and the body? And there's a whole bunch of positive benefits if you are in coherence, but you can see it objectively. So you have the self sense, like, oh my God, I'm feeling loving. Cool. Your wife can say, or your husband can say, yeah, you're loving. And you can actually see objective measurement, like, oh my God, my heart's actually in a very open, loving space. So all three are. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember because I think it was Dr. Joe Dispenza that was bringing that up when he was talking about the brain heart coherence and how, like, when you meditate and stuff and you want things to go better, raise your state, you combine those two things. And it's kind of like, and you're right, it is like, I guess we can actually measure those ways where I'm like, bro, like, that's insane. Talk about the fact that, like, getting that feedback from the human body, that's unreal. And it's not even woo woo. It's just like, yo, this is real, man. And it has been here the whole time. And it's almost like we just didn't realize it till now, which is wonderful because that kind of goes back to your work.
Yeah, and check out I think it's heartmath.com.
Yeah, I think it's the HeartMath Institute.
Like, you want to actually see the research that supports everything we just talked about? It's there for like 30 years now. I think they've been around, if not longer.
Been a long time. Well, it's kind of like Bob Monroe's out of the body, like astral projection stuff. Like all this stuff's been around, man. Like it's just interesting that it's all coming out at the same time.
Yeah, for sure.
What was the next one? You said environment, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Well, social and environment. So
okay.
The social, like we can spend hours on that too, but I just say you're the average of the 5 people you have around you. That's a common saying.
Mm-hmm.
So surround yourself with really good people. Maybe they're more loving than you. Maybe they're smarter than you. Maybe they're more physically fit than you. Whatever the things are that you want to be more of. Not that you need to judge yourself against someone else, but if you're around someone who's really pushing themselves in that particular area, like, man, that person wants to be a great husband. Wow, I can learn from them. I'm not going to be exactly like them. I have my own expression of whatever that means, but I can learn from them. Or that guy is a physical stud. Like, I want to be much more physically capable. Like, sweet. Or that guy's on an amazing spiritual path. Like, I want to learn more about his path that he's on. That's awesome. Whatever. This guy, he's emotionally like the most emotionally mature person I've ever met in my life. Sweet. Like, be around that guy. Mm-hmm. So, or like this guy, like whatever intellectual curiosities you had, this guy knows that subject matter. Like, surround yourself with people like that who call forth the best in you.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I do feel like those connections force you to grow. And sometimes, it's almost like you don't, it's funny because like for me, and the reason why I bring this up and it makes me laugh is like sometimes people will hide their lunches from me at work because I'm the, I'm the fitness trainer. I do the coaching, all that, the bodybuilding competition. And,
nice.
And, I would like to do it again in the near future, but people will see me and hide their lunches. Like, I'm gonna judge. I'm like, bro, I'm not gonna judge you, man. But people automatically have that assumption. It's like, oh no, man, he knows exactly what I'm eating. And to tell you the truth, like they'll just come up to me and be like, yo, how many calories is this? I'm like, well, approximately.
That's funny. Yeah.
But it does kind of force growth, and it's something that does bring it into their own consciousness because now they start to realize, like, okay, this is real. Like, I can't just everything around me has consequences, whether I like it or not. And there's people out there that know more about certain things and are willing to talk to you about it. And that's kind of the beauty of this podcast where I can talk to you about it, be like, okay, cool. Like, I just learned these things. And now it's like, I got to hold myself accountable a little bit more.
I'm watching you now, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll be that little voice in the back of your head.
Just in there with the consciousness. But that's kind of why I think, honestly, environment and the social groups play a large part into getting people ahead, especially guys. But what would you recommend for dudes that seem to be kind of on that lone wolf trajectory? Because you do see a lot of guys that, I mean, not from my social circle, I guess, because I'm old school. I'm right before, we started diving this age of smartphones. So I still have human friends, but some of the younger guys that may not get out as often, how would you recommend they go about just, forging new friendships and going about and maybe making a social group, so to speak?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and it leads me to a story. So, I co-created with some friends of mine what's called Team Foodishin, and it's a group now national. Actually, we have some Canadian members too, and we just do really hard shit together. We train up for it. The last thing we did was a 50-mile go ruck, so like really hard physical challenges. And we had a group of us who were meeting here. I'm in Austin, Texas. We were meeting in Austin, Texas every Saturday. You can go up to 10-mile ruck. Some days I was going up to 15 to 20. The last one I did was 30 in preparation for this thing. You don't have to do them all. And a lot of the guys, I'm 54. The guys are 21 to 34 is the oldest. I could be in all their fathers. And 21, they spoke exactly what you just said. The only opportunities we have for socialization and hanging out with other guys is to go to the bar and get drunk. And they're like, we're so sick of that. It's usually, it's not no longer fun, and it's not an opportunity to really connect with other guys in deep, meaningful ways. And they found that these hours together we spent rucking around Lady Bird Lake here was an opportunity for two things: bonding with guys at a really deep, intimate level, like they could talk about their family life, their kids, their girlfriends, their wives, in a kind of a safe environment, and get good feedback. But they're also guys; they're young, so they could talk about bullshit and fun and fuck around. So it's like a nice combination of like, we can be guys around guys, but we also have an opportunity to like share more deeply and intimately. So I would say if you don't have a group like that, do what we did. Go create a group like that. Mm-hmm. Find something, and it doesn't have to be physical. I just think physicality is a nice way to draw guys together, and it's good for guys to be physical. But maybe there's something physical that you enjoy doing that you can invite some guys that you know to go do with you. Now it has to be a community-oriented event. It's not like you can. There's a lot of physical things you can do that has no opportunity for connection. Like rucking is great because you're actually walking next to each other, carrying heavy weights, talking. But like, if you're sprinting the whole time, most likely you're not going to be engaging in deep connection.
No.
But like, find something you like to do that's physical, maybe, if that's your thing, but that allows you to contact with other guys, and either invite other guys to join you or find a group that's doing it and join it. And that can be an opportunity for you to make new friends and, grow your social network.
100%, man. Yeah, because The community side, I think, is what's missing this day and age with so much tech and stuff, which is why, like, I at first I was kind of worried because my son didn't play a lot of sports, but nowadays, he's involved with football, basketball, everything, and I'm just like, hey, develop camaraderie. It's a big part of what guys need, I think, more than anything, because it's kind of like in order to develop good relationships, and and not just now, it's like it carries over into the rest of their lives, right? Just having that good social group will influence them in positive ways. And I love what you said there. It's like if one doesn't exist, make one up. It's not too tough.
Yeah, yeah. So, that's my quick and dirty of some things I recommend for young men or men in general. I work with the young guys in their 20s all the way up to the 60s, so
Mhm.
all between. So that's my experience. My experience comes from that range of human beings, men in this particular case, of what might benefit them
Yeah.
in organization.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, I kind of love the fact that you're integrating concepts into the lives of everyday people with everyday tools. It's not
Yeah,
something
yeah,
overly complicated. It's
yeah.
it's like everybody can do it, and it's almost like sometimes going back to how we opened up, like just sit in silence for a bit, cut out the noise and just be like, okay, cool, start off from here, and then start
Right
chipping
on.
away and start integrating all the different things that you
Yeah,
said. But tell us
right
more
on.
about the things that you work with, Michael, because I mean we didn't even mention Seal Fit, but I wanted to get into that as well. Before you take off, maybe give us like a
Yeah,
5-minute lowdown on that.
yeah. So presently, there's a handful of things that I do professionally, and we even get into the policy work, which will another time, or the security work I did, and all that stuff. Just good with coaching and therapy. So, I'm almost 30 years as a licensed marriage and family therapist, a psychotherapist. I've been coaching since 2000, so 25 years of coaching, long time. Before coaching was cool. Uh, and I presently do three things in the coaching space for the most part. One is work with individuals. I have a 6-month program for resilience and human optimization and self mastery, along everything we just talked about.
Mhm.
I work with couples. I have a 6-month program similarly focused, like building more intimacy, love, care, connection, and playfulness into your marriage. And then I also co-lead a men's group with JC Glick. He's a former Army Ranger, called Resilience Optimized. And our cohort number 2 is starting here in a couple months. So we're open. We're taking people in for conversations to see if it's a good fit. And that's primarily what I do. And we could, another time, if you ever wanted to, I could jump
Oh
into
yeah.
SILF, Martin 7, and all the other things I have.
Oh, 100%. You're definitely coming back, man.
Great.
Yeah, man. I feel like we just kind of like the tip of the iceberg because there's so many different things that, I did want to get into more of the resilience, self mastery, all that kind of good stuff. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
honestly, when it comes to reaching one's highest potential, it's kind of difficult to do that in an hour. So, yeah.
That's why it's a 6-month program. Just
Yeah.
start the process. For many people, continue the process. But yeah, for sure.
100%, man. But let us know before you go, where can we find you, man?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Twitter, M Ostrolenk, Mostrolenk. Michael D. Ostrolenk. You can find me on Facebook. Make sure you include the D in there because there's another fellow like me, but he's English and he's a completely different dude. Uh, Facebook and LinkedIn, Michael D. Ostrolenk. You can find me. Instagram, M Ostrolenk. Same thing.
Yes, sir.
And yeah, and my website, michaeldostrolenk.com too. If you actually want to get hold of me, you can go through that website, or you can DM me on any of those platforms. And if you want to talk more about what I do and see if I can be helpful to you.
100%, man. I was already following your Instagram, so I was like, I've been getting little tidbits here and there, and I'm like, this is extremely interesting.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, man. But that being said, guys, we'll see you guys in the next episode. Hope you guys can take a lot out of this. And again, be sure to look at the links, which will always be in the description, where you guys can link up with Mike and get all the lowdown that you need. All right, we'll see you guys the next episode.